It was May of 1968, in a world already scarred by decades of conflict and locked in a cold and secretive standoff beneath the waves. Deep in the Atlantic, a U.S. Navy nuclear submarine slipped silently through the black water on a routine transit, a steel city carrying nearly 100 men and the weight of their nation's most dangerous technologies. She reported routine schedules, then went quiet. The USS Scorpion, a skipjack-class attack submarine, simply failed to arrive at her destination. In the hours and days after Scorpion failed to check in, the Navy launched one of the largest maritime searches in history. Aircraft scoured the surface, destroyers combed likely transit routes, and listening arrays strained for any telltale noise. The ocean is vast and indifferent. Initially, it gave nothing. The search would last months. Surface ships tossed sonar buoys, and the hush of the sea was broken by the rhythms of engines and the harsh voices of men trying to make sense of a silence that was end. But in the hushed rooms where naval intelligence and listening stations operated, there were other sounds, the ones only machines had recorded and that human ears later studied in slow playback. The U.S. undersea surveillance system, known as SOSUS, had been listening for years for the noises that submarines and other undersea events make. Analysts would later describe the record of Scorpion's final moments as two distinct metallic bangs separated by a pause, and then total silence. That pattern suggests the families of those aboard Scorpion received cautious official statements, then silence. The Navy offered condolences and technical explanations: material failure, structural weakness, pressure hull collapse, or possibly an accidental detonation. These words were attempts to put the loss into categories that could be processed, archived, and closed. But families wanted narrative and names. They wanted to know whether their sons had died instantly or suffered in final hours, whether there had been an to understand why the disappearance of a single submarine could become such a knot of theories. We need to consider what a Cold War submarine represented and why its loss mattered so much. A nuclear submarine was not simply a ship. It was a mobile, clandestine platform, a strategic asset that could carry torpedoes, missiles, and intelligence equipment. Its disappearance was both a human tragedy and a geopolitical event. In the dark oceans, silent forces played out maneuvers that could not be discussed. The early after-action reports and later in-depth inquiries wrestled with physical causes. The skipjack-class design of Scorpion emphasized speed and hydrodynamics. Its hull was constructed to survive the crushing pressures of depth. Yet no hull is impervious if struck by sufficient external force. Manufacturing defects, faulty torpedo warheads, or catastrophic internal explosions of fuel or battery cells were all considered. Then there was the equally plausible scenario of external attack. The Soviets. The sonar recordings that surfaced later, released in redacted form or described by those who had heard them, were haunting. Two percussive events, some analysts suggested, were consistent with torpedo detonations or with the explosions of collapsing ballast tanks. Others argued the pounding was internal, a torpedo tube malfunction, a battery explosion, or an accidental detonation of ordnance aboard. The exact mechanism matters in the shaping of culpability. Internal failure points to maintenance, proc. There are personal fragments in this narrative that make it painful in a different register. Logbook entries of routine checks. The last casual message about estimated arrival time. A sailor's letter stashed in a jacket pocket and never mailed. Oral histories collected years later tell of shipmates who described their friends as ordinary men. Mechanics, cooks, sonar technicians, whose daily lives were not heroic gestures, but competencies in maintenance and watch standing. Their disappearance turned orty. The presence of nuclear materials aboard complicates the moral landscape. The Scorpion carried not strategic ballistic missiles, but torpedoes with nuclear-capable warheads in the general inventory at the time. The prospect of nuclear materials sinking to the ocean floor raised both environmental and security concerns. The Navy's public statements downplayed contamination risks, but remote sensing missions over the decades have periodically checked the site with radiation meters, a silent, ongoing vigil. In the broader strategic calculus, Scorpion's loss invited reflection on underwater warfare's risks. Navies learned that stealth could be both an asset and a liability. Hiding beneath the waves made detection difficult, but it also meant that when something went wrong, rescue and recovery were nearly impossible. Fleet procedures adapted, inventory and inspection protocols tightened, and innovations in hull integrity and torpedo safety gradually improved. Survivability. The Cold War would continue, and over time, investigators and journalists sought to piece together the story from scattered documents and interviews. Some pointed to the operational tempo and the strain on systems as plausible background. Others suggested that Scorpion had been in proximity to clandestine Soviet activity and was either intentionally engaged or accidentally struck in an undersea collision. The K-129 case, with its own shrouded mysteries and a secretly mounted CIA recovery project later in 1974, only deepened public specu. Journalists and historians have tried to balance skepticism with respect for technical reality. They have interviewed former officers who remind us of the stresses of command and the kinds of rapid decisions that must be made in an environment where a misstep can kill a hull. They have spoken with engineers who describe the physics of implosion and the shattering energy of pressure hull failure, and they have recorded testimonies from family members whose lives were unalterably changed by a telegram. The Scorpion story also became a cautionary tale about transparency. In the immediate Cold War context, some secrecy was necessary. Revealing how a submarine had been lost could inform adversaries of weaknesses in design or procedure. Yet secrecy has a cost, in trust, in historical clarity, and in the hearts of those who seek answers. Years later, when elements of the record were declassified or leaked, the mosaic that emerged was still incomplete. That partial view left room for both rational explanati. The legacy of Scorpion, then, is threaded through multiple layers: a human tragedy, a caution about the limits of technology, a chapter in the broader Cold War narrative, and a reminder that not all answers are available, even after the passage of time. It influenced naval doctrine, it taught lessons about ordnance, safety, and submarine design, and it left a permanent scar on the families involved. Yet it also remains a story that stirs the imagination. The idea that beneath the surface, in the cold dark, in the end, the Scorpion's silence became a mirror for the Cold War's own quiet terror. The disappearance showed how conflict had evolved from open battlefields to a chess game played by engineers and listeners, where a single noise on a hydrophone could mean life or death. It exposed the fragility that even the most advanced platforms could not escape. And for those who remember the men, it became a call to remember not only the grand strategies and headline events, but also the individual lives that in. We close with a human image: a small group of relatives gathered on a pier at dusk, the ocean darkening to indigo, and a light breeze lifting the edge of a folded flag. They speak of birthdays and of the ordinary things that make up a life, and then they fall silent as the wind and waves take the weight of words. The sea keeps its secrets, and sometimes the only answer we can find is the quiet remembering. The USS Scorpion lies still beneath those waves, her story threaded through classified reports, son.